Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the green energy, vaccines is something that we will cover during our discussions later. But I have a question for you. You just said that you wanted Russia and Austria to expand their cooperation. We remember that in 2018, President Putin visited Austria. I think this was your first meeting. And the Russian president spoke in front of the Austrian businessmen, in front of the Chamber of Trade members. And he said that he knew about the drawbacks of the Russian investment climate, but he also gave you promises to improve that business climate. So my question is, do you think that our president had performed on his promises? Well, first of all, I have to say this. Our economic ties, the ties between Russia and Austria, have been developing for decades. It's been a positive development. They are expanding and deepening, and nothing changed our plans for the future. We will get out of this crisis. In 2018, President Putin came to Austria. He visited us on the president's invitation, and we talked about the strengthening of economic ties. We are very happy with how we have been moving forward. The damage that has been done by the pandemic is reversible. We can continue our investment activities. Our economic cooperation will lay a solid foundation, both Russia and Austria. We have a lot of different industries and areas that are of great interest to all of us. There are many areas where we can start our cooperation and continue our cooperation. I think it would be mutually beneficial for both parties, and our cooperation in all of these spheres will only continue to grow. Would you like to add something? Well, we definitely have a lot of room for improvement, but we have achieved a lot of things that had been planned. I mean here to lessen the bureaucracy. For example, it becomes easier now to connect to the grid. In the past few years, the construction permits are easier to receive. There's still room to grow. As I said, there's still room for improvement. But the lessening of bureaucracy, the development of infrastructure is definitely there. We are working with our foreign partners the same way we work with our Russian partners. In fact, if foreign partners came to build our economy, we believe that they should be treated equally as the national operators. And that can be demonstrated by the international ratings. I don't think that they're all objective, but our ratings are growing, and the growth is significant in some areas. So in general, I would say that we are moving forward according to the plan. And let me underscore as well, we don't want to make other people happy. We are doing it for ourselves. We can see that there is a certain drop in the trade turnover because of the pandemic, but the volume of investment from the Austrian business into Russia and from Russian businesses in Austria is growing. There are a number of large-scale projects such as the Nord Stream 2, and we are on our way. We're on the right pathway, and I hope that our partners, including our Austrian partners, feel the same. Well, we have a video address to the participants in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum from the President of Argentina. Dear friends, it is a great honor for me to be able to participate in this meeting organized by the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. It is a great opportunity for all of us to reflect together on where the world stood when the pandemic began. In fact, the first question that we should ask ourselves is whether our economy was strong enough. And I think we already have the answer. The world had been based on a very weak economic foundation. So weak that though the COVID-19 virus is undetectable by the human eye, it was capable of destroying not only the lives and health of millions of people, but also the world's central economies. At this point, I think we should be thinking about what the global economy should look like in the future, in the time to come. We have seen now that the old economy generated a great deal of inequality and injustice. It favored the concentration of income among the very few. It also distributed poverty among the millions of inhabitants of the globe. This logic, which prevailed for so many years, must be revised. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is the need for solidarity. During this pandemic, we have learned that no one can save themselves alone. We all need each other. We need the help from our friends. And if we work together in order to achieve a better future, we are more likely to achieve it. Over the period of the pandemic, we have seen an increase in poverty, unemployment. We can now see that the needs of the world are growing, and the world is far from being a developed world. And I'm not only talking about the world's most vulnerable countries, I'm also talking about those middle-income countries that include Argentina. These are the countries that are always treated as if they were developed countries, but they increasingly resemble poor countries. And there, the international community must take steps in order to boost the development of these middle-income countries. It is difficult to grow when you have the burden of foreign debts at very high interest rates, when you have debts that need to be paid very quickly under the terms that do not allow for growth and development. This shows that the capitalism that we knew before the pandemic has not worked. It has generated inequality and injustice. And if we're going to build another form of capitalism, it has to be a capitalism that does not forget the concept of solidarity. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it is that nobody can save themselves alone, and that there are moments when the most powerful and the weakest tremble and fall in the face of a virus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We also have a video address from the President of Brazil.
Sua Excelência, Senhor Vladimir Putin, Presidente
Your Excellency, Mr. Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank President Putin for his invitation to participate in this forum. It is the key business and economic event in all of Eurasia. I would like to congratulate the organizers of this forum. It is part of the international effort to respond to the urgency of rebuilding global health, economy, and sustainability. The St. Petersburg Forum is the main platform where we discuss the new geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. This landscape is under construction in Eurasia, a region of growing importance, which finds itself at the epicenter of the major transformations in the world today. In the context of the challenges of economic recovery imposed by the pandemic, the Forum contributes to the creation of new partnership and to the consolidation of old ties that are fundamental to the construction of a prosperous and environmentally sustainable future. Brazil desires to expand and deepen the relations of friendship and cooperation with all the countries of the Eurasian region, in particular with our host, Russia, our country's longtime partner. In the coming years, Brazil should consolidate itself as the world's largest food producer. Even in the context of the pandemic that ravages the planet, we continue to guarantee food security for 1/6 of the world's population. Brazilian agriculture meets the highest sanitary and sustainability requirements. Only 27% of our land is used by agricultural business. We are proud by the fact that we managed to conserve 84% of our Amazon ecosystem and 66% of our native flora. We're working to increase our food exports, including exports to the Russian market and to other countries in the region. Our economies are part of the same agricultural business value chain. Brazil is the biggest destination for Russian fertilizer exports, and they're essential for the Brazilian agriculture. We would like to maintain this mutually beneficial reciprocity for both sides. And there is an ample potential to diversify our trade agenda. This should and can include more higher value-added products. Entrepreneurs and businessmen from our countries play a key role in identifying new and profitable opportunities. In this regard, it is critically important to deepen our cooperation in the area of investment. We should continue to work together to develop partnerships in the areas of technology, defense, space, energy, and health. Brazil is open to new opportunities for cooperation in high technology, such as nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. I wish all the delegates at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum every success. I would like to join the political and business leaders who are present here in their efforts to build an international order based on economic prosperity, freedom, peace, and sustainable development for all. Thank you very much. Vladimir Vladimirovich, I'm looking at this video address, and I have a question. Why are we so bold to come together in this audience? Is the pandemic over already? Well, we have come here together as recommended by our health and sanitary experts. They believe that we already can do that in this kind of format. Unfortunately, we were not able to accept the leaders that had to join us by the video link. And this is not because they didn't want to come, but because they had to bring big delegations, and it was very difficult to make sure that everybody stays safe. We have to maintain certain measures, and I can see that some of our colleagues are wearing masks and gloves, and in fact a lot of people, half of the world, is still staying at home. Yes, that's true, and the situation in our country may be a little better than in some other countries, but the pandemic is far from being over. We still have to be very careful. But it's summer, people want to communicate, there are lots of contact. A lot of people, unfortunately, believe that this is not something to do with them. They disregard the various sanitary measures imposed by the health authorities. But today, the situation in St. Petersburg and in Russia is such that we can have such events without risking of spreading the infection. This is because of the favorable situation that we enjoy in Russia right now. Right. Well, before I go into investment and money, I would like to ask you another question about football. His Highness, the Emir of Qatar, in spite of the pandemic, everybody is watching what is happening to the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games were moved. We don't know how exactly they will be held, whether the spectators will be allowed. So we have a question. Vladimir Putin has given a symbolic ball to Qatar. And we remember that the FIFA World Cup in Russia was recognized by the FIFA as one of the best events ever. Are you planning to beat us there? How is the preparation going? Do you think that the World Cup will take place next year? And how did the pandemic affect the preparation process?
ذكرت بأن فخامة الرئيس سلمنا الكرة الرمزية في 2018.
You said that President Putin has given us the symbolic ball in 2018, and that is true. Due to President Putin's efforts, due to the efforts of the Russian people, due to the efforts of those of our citizens who work in the organizing committee, everything is being done in order to hold the World Cup at the best possible level. We are preparing for the event. We believe that there should be no delays in the construction process. We are confident that everything will be on schedule, and the November championship of the Arab countries will be a very good rehearsal. The pandemic is raging across the world. It did not hit our country alone. We are a little bit late with the construction of some of the sites, but that doesn't prevent us from holding this event. We have the infrastructure almost ready. We are definitely going to be ready to host the World Cup. And as I said, in 2018, Russia showed a wonderful case of organizing such an event. In fact, it raised the bar for all of us, and we will definitely use the experience and the best practices that were shared with us by Russia. We hope that Russia will help us to organize this event at a very high level. And nevertheless, this bar that was raised that high will become a motivation for us, and we are confident that we will be able to hold it very well.
Moving on to the economic agenda, especially given the fact that President Putin has just said that the first string of Nord Stream 2 has been completed. Chancellor Kurz, we have seen what the U.S. attitude towards this project has been over the recent years. There were some restrictions imposed, delays. Do you think there are still risks that the project is not going to be implemented, or is it a fait accompli? Or is there a risk that once the construction is completed and once the gas is in the pipeline, your companies will still be not able to access it?
Es ist richtig, dass auch ein österreichisches Unternehmen, nämlich die
Well, it's true. The Austrian companies are taking part in this project. And just as Germany, the Austrian Republic, and a number of other European countries have a positive attitude towards this project. And of course, there are other countries like Greece who are interested in this project too. We are convinced that the routes, the pipelines, are designed in the proper way, and we are hoping that just as in the past, in Austria and in other parts of Europe, we will be able to get gas via these pipelines, because we will be needing those gas supplies. And Nord Stream, as aptly mentioned, is providing us with reliable routes for exporting gas. This project should be completed based on the agreements that have been reached and that you have mentioned. In our view, we should be optimistic. We hope that the project is going to be completed, just as Germany hopes for its completion and other European countries too. We hope that this is going to ensure European security of Europe. And we also hope that this is going to be beneficial to Russia too, because we are purchasing a lot of gas from the Russian market. So do you think there is a risk that the project will be stopped due to American sanctions, or that it is going to be impossible to operate due to American sanctions, Mr. President? I have to say that I said that on many occasions, and I would like to reiterate that this is a purely commercial, economic project. And those who believe that this is us trying to bypass other transit players, they're wrong. Because the route via the seabed of the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany, as far as the length is concerned, is shorter. It's simply shorter than if it had to go through European countries like Slovakia, Ukraine, Austria directly. So it's cheaper and it's shorter to transport gas via this route. Secondly, there are no political risks, country-specific risks. And you don't have to pay for the transit. So economically, this project is more reasonable. It's more beneficial. It means that the end consumer, the utilities, the citizens, the companies will get gas at a cheaper price than if it had to go through other countries. So economically, it's just more reasonable. But the propaganda is still raging on, trying to feed some lies to people, trying to convince them that there is some politics involved, some trick or something. Why do you think our partners are fighting this project? Do you think they want to please us? No, they are simply trying to look after their own national interests. That's plain and simple. And I think this project has to be completed, especially amid the new environment, when the new American administration, the US administration says that it wants to build good relations with its primary partners in Europe. And how can you build good partners with your partners while disregarding their interests? That would be nonsensical. Moreover, this gas is the cleanest source of energy in the world, and I'll tell you why. You know, when this fracking is used, around 70%, more than 70% of American gas is produced via fracking, whereas Gazprom only produces 11%. But the gas coming for Nord Stream 2 does not use any fracking to produce. And from the environmental point of view, fracking is a truly catastrophic type of production, because dozens and hundreds of tons of chemical substances are pumped into the ground, and it deals direct damage to the environment. Everyone is talking about the economy and the environment, and here you have a flagrant example of how it's happening when fracking is used. So sanctions are deleterious to the world economy because they lead to a shrinking instead of boosting it. And moreover, sanctions also represent a tool for bad faith competition. And as far as gas goes as a source of fuel for the world economy, let us keep in mind that gas is the best, the most in-demand product for a very long period, while a transition is being effected towards a green energy. So out of all hydrocarbons, gas will stay in the market the longest because it's most environmentally friendly. And I think that such projects serve not just our interests, but the interests of our partners in Europe, and they have to be completed. And I said the line pipe of the first string has been completed, so within a month or two, I hope the other string is going to be completed to the tune of 27.5 million. And what about the supplies? Well, you see, Mr. Piller is here to the opposite from us, and he tells that to me all the time. There are two pipes, and they're close to one another. You've got to raise them a little bit on the German side and the Russian side, and you've got to weld these pipes together. It's going to take 10 days or so. Gazprom was willing to begin supplies. It's going to be up to the German regulator. I know that there's been a delegation of Germany to the US. I don't know whether the delegation is back or not. They had talks on how to agree with that, with the American partners on that. But, you know, the American gas is 25% more expensive, let alone the fact that fracking is used to produce that. So is your dilemma. Either you buy cleaner gas and cheaper gas from us, or you buy a product that is environmentally dubious. You know, sometimes green parties say that you've got to you buy green. They've got to take LNG from America, but if they're truly green, if they're true environmentalists, they have to know that this gas is produced with the help of fracking, and that is environmentally harmful. So let's have an honest look at all of this and make the conclusions. And it's more environmentally friendly, it's cleaner, it's cheaper, it's more reliable. The product that we offer, and that's why our partners choose it. But the thing is, the current pipeline that is in operation is feeding whole regions of Europe. Recently, President Zelensky said, do you think we have to feed everyone? Do you think we're responsible for that? The Ukrainian president has said that there's going to be no money for the Ukrainian armed forces if there is no gas transit from Russia via Ukraine. So once Nord Stream 2 is complete, do you think the gas distribution network of Ukraine will no longer be required? I would like to ask my press secretary, Mr. Peskov, to say that, but now that I have this opportunity to say that personally, I will say the following. First, we've got a contract in place with Ukraine on pumping our gas through. And for the coming 5 years, we're going to pump up to 40 billion cubic meters. I think during the best years, the figure was up to 200. We used to export gas to Germany back in 2018. I think we provided them with more than 200 billion cubic meters. And if we had normal relations, then most of that gas would have gone through Ukraine. But problems are being created, and not political ones, economic ones. Because the monopoly to gas transit creates an illusion that you can boost the prices to the skies, asking for exorbitant prices for gas transit. And at the same time, they want to decrease the prices for the gas they buy directly. So it's all about monopolies, and it's not about politics. It goes way back. We signed a memorandum with Ukraine, and there is a former chancellor of Germany here, Mr. Schröder, myself, Mr. Schröder, the then chancellor, and the then president of Ukraine, Mr. Kuchma. We all signed a memorandum on building a consortium on the basis of the Ukrainian gas distribution system with the participation of Ukraine, Russia, Germany, and other projects, and we wanted that consortium to be the property of Ukraine. This consortium was supposed to develop this system. After that, President Yushchenko came, and it all, was revisited and revised, and there was a scandal when Ukraine simply blocked the transit. You see what kind of risks were involved. It's not about the armed forces Ukraine allegedly has no money to pay for. Right now, we get $1.5 billion for transit, but they could get up to $3 to $4 to $5 billion for the transit, but they simply destroy that, all of them. We've got, as I said, a contract of 40 billion cubic meters, and we believe that the exports to Europe might rise another 50 billion of additional gas. This quarter we see record purchases. Last year, the gas exports stood at 180 billion. This year, it can reach more than 200 billion because the economy is recovering after the pandemic and the demand is growing. And we believe that in the next 10 years, we can see another 50 billion cubic meters. So you see, the Ukrainian transit system could be used even once our contract on transit runs out, once it expires. And we're willing to do that, but there needs to be goodwill on the side of our Ukrainian counterparts. And they shouldn't seek to get money out of that to achieve a military solution to the Donbass project. No, they need that, and they need to think about recovering the economy, rebuilding it, helping people. Yes, we have difficult relations with the Ukrainian authorities, but we are caring about the people who live in Ukraine. We're not indifferent to that. If we had good relations, you know, right now we sell the gas at $63 for 1,000 meters, whereas in Ukraine it's almost 300 or 350. I'm not going to name the figure for Belarus, but Belarus pays 3 times less than at the hub, whereas the Ukrainians pay even more than that. We want to foster normal economic relations. This is something we want, and we are hopeful that common sense is going to prevail in decision-making. So if we look a more global look at the gas market, setting aside Nord Stream 2 and others, since this is a plenary discussion, let's have a look at Austria, which uses euro and has euro. There is Qatar and Russia that have gas. So could you tell me, please, why Qatar and Russia are selling gas for dollars to the Eurozone that uses euro? So why do you need the third element? So let's start with Chancellor Kurz. Why are you paying with dollars for gas, even though you have euro and you could pay with euro?
Also ich glaube, die Frage lässt sich sehr einfach zu beantworten. Wir haben eine...
Well, there is a very simple answer to that question. We've got an international system, and that is why market prices are calculated in dollars. So our currency, well, we do use it, but the thing is we are using a system that has already proven its efficiency. And if we look at the Austrian economy, as you can see, our economy has been making very good headway, advancing steadily, and we need energy security. And that is why Austria has built a whole system of its energy security, taking into account different factors. We have made great headway in securing renewable sources of energy. And by 2030, we would like to reach 100% of renewable energy sources in our economy. But so far, we still require both oil and gas. And that is why we have very good ties with many countries. We have also fostered good and reliable cooperation. That's why we view Nord Stream 2 in a very positive light. We don't want to save or economize on transit. We only want to make sure everything is safe, secure, and reliable. As for Ukraine, yes, we would very much like there to be a solution to this issue of Ukraine. We believe international cooperation has to develop, and the better it is, the more stability it means for all of us. And the better it is for economic development, not just in Europe, but also elsewhere. So you say that this is just the way the international system works, but it was built back in the 20th century, and we have always lived through a quarter of the 21st century. You say that the dollar-denominated system is reliable, but how can it be reliable when the third external party can block the payments at any time? So is it really that reliable, as you say?
Wissen Sie, die Marktpreise werden international in Dollar.
The thing is, market prices across the world are calculated in US dollars. So it's just a tradition. We could pay in euro for our energy requirements, but we do not think this has to be a question of geopolitics. It's pure economics for us. So if the prices are calculated in dollars, then it's not that important what currency they're denominated in, they're calculated in, but we have to think about sustainable development. We have to think about preserving and conserving our resources, transporting energy too. We've got to take all of that into account, and that is why when we look at big countries, we understand that maybe for them the currency, it's important, but we are a small nation, and security is more important to us than the price. Mr. President, do you think currency is not important? I think what's important is predictability and reliability. The currency is not important. And what about the third party? That's a spoke in the wheel, as it were. Well, if the issuer, the U.S., does not value their currency as an international reserve currency, and I don't think they're valuing that because they're using that as an instrument for competitive fight, and it deals damage to the reputation of U.S. dollar as the world currency. If you look at what's happening, this is not our assessment. It's an assessment of IMF, the World Bank, and many countries, even U.S. allies, are decreasing their national reserves denominated in U.S. dollars, and their transactions in dollars are also going down.
However, we see that Russian operators mostly prefer operations in US dollars, although we have to acknowledge that what is mostly tied to US dollars, oil, so it is a stock-traded commodity, unlike gas. So generally, we are okay analyzing the option to make those settlements in national currencies, and this is something that we have been doing with a number of our partners. We're ready to discuss potential settlements in euro as well. Euro is an absolutely acceptable currency for us in terms of trading gas. That could be done and probably should be done. However, if even the oil industry shifts away from transactions in dollar, then it would be a very strong attack on dollar as a world reserve currency. That would be a very big damage. So we do not want to use those tools for some kind of political purposes, and we don't want to do that. But the whole logics of development of the world economic system and the world currency system is showing us that we need to have this diversity in reserve currencies in order to guarantee the sustainability of the world economic system. And that's something that we're cautiously thinking about. Your Highness, may I please ask your opinion on that? The state of Qatar being the largest manufacturer of LNG and one of the largest suppliers to Europe, what is the vision of the state of Qatar on the future of the world gas market? Do you recognize any risks in the fact that Europe is shifting towards the carbon neutrality policy?
نعم مثل ما ذكرت قطر تلعب دور هام في
Yes, indeed. As you rightfully said, Qatar is playing a big role in gas supplies. Namely, up until to 2026, we plan to raise the share up to 40%. Therefore,
It is fair to say that LNG from Qatar is of high quality, and that is our competitive advantage that we're making use of. We cooperate with many international companies, including Russian companies, and we use the efficiency of this cooperation to our common good, and we certainly use modern technologies. We take into account all the issues of safety and environment protection that are, of course, very important. And like I said, we plan to achieve an indicator of 40% by 2026. As for the gas exporting countries, I hope that soon we're going to have yet another meeting of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum that is going to take place in Qatar, and we are going to discuss further potential cooperation and coordination of our actions. Certainly, we have huge responsibility on our shoulders. We feel ourselves responsible for the future of the energy sector in this regard. And I have to say that one of the key elements of our future vision is on the effective use of gas. Thank you for your attention. Now, coming to the topic of sanctions. Sanctions have been mentioned more than once today. There are sanctions against Russia. There are sanctions adopted by Russia against other countries in response. Lately, we've seen a list of unfriendly countries being published by Russia. On this list, there are two countries so far, the United States and the Czech Republic. We could probably discuss why exactly those two countries. But since that is an economic forum, I would like to ask you, President Putin, how can we raise investment from unfriendly countries? Well, we have to work and cooperate with the people and the companies in those countries that do not consider Russia to be its enemy. The delegation of the U.S. businessmen is traditionally present at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and just about 2 years it was the most numerous delegation. Well, it is actually the same case this time, more than 200 participants from the United States. Well, that is a clear indicator that the U.S. businesses are interested in working in Russia. And despite all the political restrictions and limitations, they are doing best in order to retain their positions on the Russian market, because that is an exciting and promising market. Many companies keep their capitalization high thanks to doing business in Russia and having their assets here. And those are big amounts of assets, especially in the energy field. So that is exactly those people and those companies that have enough common sense in order to build relationship with Russia is something that we will keep doing business with. Mr. Chancellor, how do you think? Why is the relationship between Russia and Europe have been deteriorating so dramatically over the last few years?
Naja, es ist, ehrlich zu sein, etwas, das mir auch Sorgen macht und mit dem ich sehr unglücklich
Well,
bin.
indeed, frankly speaking, that is also a very negative and upsetting factor to me too. When I took my office, I was very much hopeful that the conflict in the east of Ukraine would be resolved, and very soon we would move on to fruitful and positive cooperation. However, over the last few years, we've been discussing that with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs and many other stakeholders. However, unfortunately, nothing has changed for the better, and that does not contribute to world stability. What we see is rather, indeed, a deterioration in relationship between Russia and the EU. And there might be different reasons for that, but the objective of Austria is to make its contribution to make sure that this spiral of escalation is calming down and finally coming to an end. We believe there are certain steps being made that contradict to the international law. And those are the steps that resulted in the current situation. They brought us where we are in the east of Ukraine. And of course, we would like to search for options for potential cooperation. Of course, we would like to find a way out of this very bad and very unpleasant situation on a diplomatic level in the format of Minsk mechanism and Minsk arrangements. And there are very many countries that are interested to make sure that there is a certain detente coming, that we come back to normal and reasonable dialogue. And certainly, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum is exactly a platform that is bringing us together rather than making us fight one another. And that is the right thing. That is how it should be done. All the key players understand that keeping this world a peaceful place is our shared objective. You can't aim for peace and be against someone. We have always supported the steps and mechanisms adopted by the European Union. Austria supports them whenever we understand and recognize that there were some steps being made against the norms of international law. However, we want to achieve stability in the common interest in Ukraine, in Russia, all around the world. President Putin, Russia responds to all attempts of introducing sanctions by providing stimuli and impetus to domestic development and growth. We all understand that the previous year was difficult for the whole world. Unfortunately, the pandemic caused a lot of damage, a lot of human lives have been lost, and the world is split into two big groups: countries that have money for technologies and vaccines to save human lives, and the other group are the countries that don't have this money. And those are not just some faraway regions in Latin America and Africa. Even in Eastern Europe, we have neighbors that are in a dramatic situation. Let's take the example of Ukraine. And Russia, despite the thoughts of many, ended up in the first group. Russia has money, Russia has technologies. Russia was the first to get the official vaccine against coronavirus registered and rolled out the vaccination campaign. We have money to provide additional impetus to the economic development. However, once the previous very difficult pandemic year was over, it turned out that the state reserves of Russia have increased, while the state budget, we have the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Silvanov in the room, has a profit of 1 trillion rubles. I guess investors in the room would have questions. If the Russian authorities are keeping their money untouched in the budget with a profit, why would the foreign investors believe them and invest in Russia? Well, I don't really follow your logics. The thing is that we haven't fully used all the money allocated to the state budget and that we're planning to spend. Well, that's not something extraordinary. That is something that happens relatively frequently, and that is due to the fact that money is being allocated for specific measures and events, but then they are not allocated or not spent because the operators have been planning to have this spending connected with implementation of the respective projects are not ready to accept this financing and start implementing the projects. It's a standard economic practice. There is nothing extraordinary about that. But that is the truth, that we do have available resources that we need. And this year we are going to have a budget profit, and the trade saldo is also demonstrating a certain profit, 146 billion US dollars. The gold and forex reserves are increasing. More than $600 billion is the amount of gold and forex reserves in our country. That applies to the sovereign wealth fund of Russia. So those are just approximate figures that I'm naming now. I might be not quite exactly right about them, but the idea is that those reserves are increasing, and the foreign sovereign wealth fund and this is something that we specifically decided to set up if it is above 65%, then we are going to allocate money for big infrastructure projects. But in order to spend this money on the infrastructure project, we need to get them prepared. And we can't spend this money everywhere for all the sources we have. It's not just like planting seeds, hoping that they will grow. We have to be very careful and very rational. It has to be a well-thought process. And it's not just that we're greedy and don't want to spend money and end up in the surplus as a result of that. Well, then I would rephrase my question. Is Russia having any plans to spend the money it has having it in its reserves? Well, we are spending this money from those reserves, and the foreign sovereign wealth fund is already spending some money. And it was mentioned by our finance minister. Well, those are hundreds of billions of rubles that have already been invested into these infrastructure projects and other large-scale projects. Although we are trying to invest this money in the project that bring us returns. Not today, not in a year time. This is a long investment horizon, but still we expect some returns. And from the economic viewpoint, that is the right approach. We're already doing that, and we will keep doing that in the future. That also relates to the railway, transportation, roads, and many more. This is something that we're doing already, and the industrial development is also something that we invest into. Those are large-scale industrial projects. Of course we're doing that. And Mr. Michelson, am I right in saying that Novatek also received some financing? Well, there you go. And gas liquefaction is yet another project. Together with our partners from China and France, Russia has been supporting that type of project and investing this money also from the Sovereign Wealth Fund. One of the big problems that Russia, according to many businessmen, is facing are high interest rates. In one of the Telegram channels, a well-known blogger, Oleg Deripaska, I don't know, Mr. President, whether you sign up to his Telegram channel. Well, in his Telegram channel, Oleg Deripaska is regularly writing about the policies of the central bank, claiming that the central bank is not providing enough money for the business development by keeping the interest rates too low. Can you please comment on that? Well, those who are taking loans obviously want to have lower rates, but those who are providing those loans, and that of course applies to the central bank, is primarily responsible for keeping track of the macroeconomic indicators. And the key issue with the macroeconomic indicators is the following. Well, look, yesterday and even this morning I've been discussing it with some issues. There are two key issues that we're facing as of today. What are they? The labor market. It has to be recovered at least to the level of 4.7%, and that was the indicator before the pandemic, while the level of unemployment we have now is 5.2%. And the second issue is inflation. Now the inflation is 5.8%, and the experts generally agree that we could keep it at a level of 5% or somewhat less. That is the level of inflation that we would like to have as a result of 2021. Therefore, the central bank has generally been keeping the interest rate relatively low for our economy. The key policy rate has been low for quite a long period of time, and the central bank had to react on what was happening in the economy in general by retaining liquidity. And Mr. Deripaska is very well aware of it. He is an experienced businessman, a successful one, but certainly he is willing to have cheaper money, and finding the right balance of those interests is exactly the truth. Well, and some claim that the authorities do not react to the comments of the bloggers. Here you go. And yet another problem that is being actively discussed by the business is the pressure from the law enforcement agencies. Sometimes that type of issues is being discussed on the international level. We can recall the case of Michael Calvi and some other cases. In the Moscow pre-detention centers is something that we have a record amount of businessmen. And just in Moscow, I've prepared some coverage on that. And one of the stories that I covered in my program was on a businessman from Komi. That was somebody named Georgy Popov. He is sitting in a pretrial detention for 4 years already, waiting for the sentence, and it's still not there. Once you said, and I quote, We all tend to think that if we bring more order in a very tough way, we will all live better and safer lives. Well, in fact, this level of comfort would disappear very quickly because while being tough, we might feel strangled very quickly. Don't you think that we're already being strangled? Are you sure you have just quoted me? Yes, you said that in 1996. Well, I don't really feel anybody being strangled. Well, the issues of law enforcement agencies are indeed high on our agenda. And indeed, we need to pay attention to that. And you know my position on that. The law enforcement agencies are there to protect the interests of the state, of the society, of the citizens of our country, but entrepreneurs are also citizens of our country, and they're doing a very important business. They are supporting the economic activity in our country. They create workplaces. They support levels of income and salaries of our citizens. They guarantee their revenues. And this is something that I keep talking about all the time. So we need to carefully watch what is happening, and that is exactly why we have the Ombudsman's office set up for taking care of the rights of entrepreneurs. However, I think you would agree that the quality of entrepreneurship and the activity that they engaged in does not give them a right to violate the law. We certainly need to further enhance our legal framework. And lately, we've adopted a whole number of legislative decisions by increasing the role played by the General Prosecutor's Office in the supervision and oversight of the activities of the law enforcement agencies, and I hope that it will play a role in this regard. As for the so-called prisons population, I would like to draw your attention that over the last few years it has been decreased by 2 times. Therefore, we generally enhance this legal framework. Well, irrespectively of entrepreneurs' right, don't you think that the person has not committed any violent crimes? Do they really have to sit 4 years in the pretrial detention center? Well, that is a specific case. I need to know the detail. I can't comment on it right now. But since you've raised this issue here, I will pay attention to that. But obviously, the sooner and the faster those processes evolve, the sooner the investigation process is over, the better would be the general operation of the system. Well, as for the investment climate in Russia, well, we know that investment is streaming to various sectors of the Russian economy. That is, of course, the energy sector, but not only that. Tell us, what are the most promising sectors of the Russian economy you think would be most exciting for the state of Qatar? Can you think of the projects that would be of interest in Russia to the Qatar businessmen?
Qatar is one of the largest investors in Russia. There are approximately $12 billion of investment. There are all kinds of investment into infrastructure and the energy sector. There are Russian companies that work in Qatar. We are confident in the Russian economy. We have confidence in the future of our investment. And we keep in touch with the relevant authorities in Russia. We look for new opportunities for investment in Russia and for Russian companies in Qatar. As I said in my earlier presentation, our investment in Russia is going to double. We have all kinds of investment. We invest into different areas. And it is an issue very high on our agenda, especially in the context of an upcoming FIFA World Cup. We pay great attention to the development of tourism. Tourists from Qatar would like to visit many different historic places in Russia, and I'm sure that Russian tourists would be happy to come to Qatar, especially when life gets back to normal after COVID-19. I think there will be a lot of investment in tourism later on. Well, obviously, there's a lot of investment into healthcare. Mr. Federal Chancellor, I see that there's a poll in Austria. 69% of all the residents of your country supported or would want to support the purchase of the Sputnik V vaccine to be used in Austria. And I know that you initiated a conversation with the RDIF in order to possibly procure the vaccines. And you said that it should not matter where the vaccine comes from the US, from Russia, or any other country. But the picture is not, does not look like this. It seems that the EU cares where the vaccine comes from. Do you think it is a political topic in Europe?
Also für uns ist es definitiv kein politisches Thema, sondern ich habe in meiner
It is not a political topic for us. I would rather say, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, we should not take into account geopolitical issues. When it comes to vaccines, I'm very glad to see that many different countries, many different companies managed to develop a vaccine. Sputnik V came early into the market together with Moderna and other vaccines. We now can choose, and you're quite right. There was a very productive meeting with our Russian partners on the procurement, on the purchase of vaccine. But unfortunately, based on our legislation, the vaccine can only be used when it is approved by the EU authorities. This is true for other vaccines as well, and it is a long process. The process for Sputnik V is still ongoing, but I very much hope that the approval process will be finalized soon. Had we been given this permission earlier, we could have purchased Sputnik for Austria in order to speed up the vaccination process, but right now the approval has not been granted yet. In order to protect our population, we have been using the vaccines that were approved for use in the EU. Unfortunately, we only were able to vaccinate 50% of our population above the age of 65. So we are above average compared to other European countries here. The number of deaths has dropped, and we very much hope that the spread of the virus in Austria will decrease. Compared to other European countries, we are in a very favorable situation, I would say. We hope this will help us, and we will be able to open up to the rest of the world. That will definitely help the economic growth and the development of tourism. For Austria, tourism is a very important industry, and hopefully very soon we will be able to engage in tourism. We will be able to invite guests from all over the world. We very much hope that Russian tourists will flood into Austria very soon in order to spend their vacations in our country. And again, we hope this industry will recover soon. It is always a good thing when people meet each other and communicate with each other. Mr. Federal Chancellor, the 90% of all the purchases of vaccines are done from one supplier only. We have 4 different vaccines in Russia. There's no monopoly. In the EU, it seems that we have a monopoly from one supplier. As far as we understand, the agreement with the supplier was signed in such a way that the supplier does not bear any responsibility for the vaccine. In fact, the long-term effect of the technology, the mRNA vaccine, is still doubtful. Do you see any risks for the EU based on the fact that we have an artificially created monopoly when only one supplier dominates the market?
Nein, da muss ich Ihnen widersprechen. Ich kenne die Situation sehr genau.
Well, I have to say that I'm actively involved in this situation. It's been a year since I've been closely following everything related to the pandemic. It is a very important topic for the EU, for Europe. In Austria, we use several different vaccines. We use Moderna and others. We will be adopting or granting permission for the use of other vaccines, but within the EU, we are now trying to make this process faster. We have to protect our population, and we follow the advances of different vaccines with great attention. It is a pity that Sputnik V has not been yet approved for use in the EU. We were ready to procure this vaccine for Austria. We would have been happy to use it in our country. Unfortunately, as I said, we can only use in Austria the vaccines that have been approved for use within the EU, those vaccines that can be used within the European Union. But hopefully, Sputnik V will be approved soon, and it will be allowed to be used in the EU. 60 countries all over the world are using this vaccine, and I very much hope that this will happen in the EU as well. I believe that every efficient, safe vaccine should be used to protect the people. Our international cooperation is going down the right pathway. I don't know about the monopoly, but you are quite right in saying that Sputnik V has not been approved for use. But since it's being used in other countries, I'm confident that it will be approved in the EU as well. When you read the titles of different articles and when you read the words of different politicians who say that this vaccine is a political tool that Russia uses, it's a tool of Russian influence, what do you think about it? I think this is a struggle for money. This is the war of the vaccine producers, and they do it brilliantly. They do it very well. They're quite successful in this. And this is not what I'm reading that matters only. I'm not going to give you names, but I recently spoke to one of the leaders of the EU, and I was told that I want to try and try to make sure that the countries have a conflict between them because we are throwing this vaccine in. But they say, do you have the application? Yes, the application was filed last year, and it was only in March this year that the relevant European authorities announced that they are about to only begin the process of approval. And apparently they're still looking into that. What does that mean for us? It means that there's a certain interest on the part of those who are involved in this business, and they are taking over the market. They only work with the companies that they have been working together for many years, and there are several sort of echelons of protection. I'm not going to go into details there, but what you mentioned in terms of the political tool, it is a commercial tool. It is a tool that serves commercial interests, and that's the only thing that we can say about it. Different European countries behave differently, and that is not based on their politics. Some have specific relevant authorities. Some have structures such as laboratories that can assess pharmaceuticals. Others don't have such laboratories. They have to wait for the decisions from the EU regulators. those that have such labs, they can take such decisions, such as Hungary. Hungary made their decision. They certified the Russian vaccine, and they have been using Sputnik V. But policy is always there. But in this particular case, in my view, this is a situation where economic and commercial interests are being served to the detriment of the European nations. The country that invented the first vaccine, that approved the first vaccine, and it is symbolic that it is called Sputnik, just like the first satellite made by the Soviet Union. We have this analogy of the first man in space. It all comes from the same country. But at the times when there was this space exploration, the entire country was enthusiastic about it. But somehow today we don't see a lot of people flooding into vaccination centers. Well, there are many reasons for that. And not everybody gets vaccinated against the flu. It seems to be the general mood. And as I said in my presentation earlier, we are ready to provide the vaccine for everyone who wants to get vaccinated. We don't want to make people to do that. There are other ways to incentivize people. I know that in some countries they have all kinds of incentives for that people can get a free beer after a shot. I'm sure that there are civilized ways to motivate people to get vaccinated, but the most important thing is information, awareness raising, and explaining the safety of the vaccine. And this is something that we need to do. We have to continue to work on what we do, and I mean the authorities. Well, maybe we should include the beer brewers into that process. That's a good idea. Yeah, well, maybe we can give a beer or give the sausage to those who get vaccinated. Another question is related to something that is the whole world is interested in. Your meeting with Joe Biden. Could you please tell us what are you planning to discuss with the American president? We plan to discuss our bilateral relations. And I proceed from the fact that we need to find the ways to regulate strengthen our relations because we are at a very low point. We need to be able to regulate the conflicts in the so-called hotspots in the world. We are going to discuss the terrorism, we are going to discuss the pandemic, and we're going to discuss the environment. This is the preliminary agenda. When you had a meeting with the previous American president in 2018, you had a meeting with Donald Trump. That was the very end of the FIFA World Cup, and the expectations were very high that maybe our relations will be better. But it seemed that there were more sanctions imposed on Russia after that meeting than before. Are we going to have the same thing now? Well, you should ask President Biden. We are not planning to introduce any sanctions. We only do that where we can, where we feel it is safe, where we don't want to shoot ourselves in the leg. Why our American partners are doing what they're doing, I think it's still a mystery to us. I'm sure that this is happening because of the internal political processes. The U.S.-Russian relations, to a degree, became a hostage to the political processes that are going on in the U.S., and I feel that the fundamental interests, the stability, for fighting the threat of dangerous weapons are more important than the political situation in the U.S. We know that a day before the Putin-Biden meeting, there's going to be a EU-US summit where the American president is going to be present. In fact, he will be going to the meeting with President Putin from that meeting directly. And we can see a lot of discussion in the newspapers that maybe this summit is going to create to undermine the meeting with President Putin, that perhaps there will be some kind of a declaration adopted that will be very openly anti-Russian, that there will be some very big announcements against Russia. So what should be waiting for at this from this US-EU summit?
Also das glaube ich nicht, dass das so eintreten wird. Und ich glaube
I don't think this is going to look like that.
das Treffen zwischen den EU-Spitzen und Joe Biden, das Thema Russland.
I think the EU-US meeting, the meeting with the participation of President Biden, is not going to focus on the relations with Russia. We are going to discuss multilateral relations, multilateral cooperation with the US. We want to strengthen our cooperation with the US. We are going to talk about the general path towards cooperation. We are definitely going to discuss the climate change issues. We believe that the US should recognize the Paris agreements and that they will be able to play their role in the struggle against the climate change and that they will reduce their CO2 emissions. That's what we expect from that meeting. The climate doesn't care where the emissions are happening. We are a small country, and even in Austria, we understand that even though we are ready to contribute to this effort, if the United States is not part of this effort, then it will not be a success. And I feel that this is the main objective of that meeting. That's the kind of objective that has already been announced, and I hope that the US will play their part in this effort. So these are some of the points that we expect to find during the meeting on the 15th of June. What else I can say about this meeting? The meeting between the US president and the Russian president. We are a small country. Traditionally, we have had good relations both with the West and the East, so we are optimistic. We watch the superpowers build their relations. They're not always very easy, and we are very glad that this meeting will take place. Hopefully, these meetings will create a foundation. We're looking forward to positive results of this meeting. As to the meeting between the EU leaders and President Biden, I believe that this is what is going to happen. In the past few years, we are not used to see Russia high on the agenda. In fact, we usually had Russia almost at the top of the agenda. But the interference in the elections, we heard about U.S. claiming that Russia intervened into the elections, and Russia keeps saying that the U.S. interfered in the elections. This is not only a U.S.-Russia story. We heard that in Moldova there was a meeting with the ambassador of the U.S. right before the elections. We can see that some of the election technologies are becoming quite global. And as we live in this global world, it's hard to determine what is going to be an interference or not, whether or not ambassadors can meet with other people. Do you think we can develop a fair play rules?
Well, theoretically, it's possible. You said differences, but we do not have differences with the U.S. There is only one difference they would like to contain to deter our development, and this is something they are declaring publicly. And the rest is but a derivative of this position they have taken. So that's that. And hence, economic restrictions, attempts and influencing internal political processes in our country, using forces they believe to be theirs inside Russia. So that's how it is. That's how things stand. Of course, we are watching what is happening in the U.S. We're never, however, interfering. Yes, we often hear allegations about elections, political processes in Russia and elsewhere. But you see, the U.S. has just held their own elections, and almost half of voters in the U.S. believe the elections to have been unjust, and these are the polls conducted inside the US by their own services, research centers. So this is not something we've just made up. These are the polls conducted by their own polling organizations. And of course, remember that incident when the protesters entered the Capitol, the Congress, but these were not just plunderers or robbers. They came with political demands, and 450 people were detained. Criminal charges have been brought against all of them. 70 were detained right away, and 31 are still under arrest. Based on what? Has anyone informed us on that? No. And this is a political matter, and many of them are facing very serious charges. I think some of them are even facing charges of trying to conduct an anti-constitutional coup. Well, I'm not going to talk about Russia. Let's have a look at Belarus. This country has many internal problems, but we would like to remain impartial. It's for the Belarusian people to sort this out. And they have, and you see what's happening in Belarus is given one assessment, but the same thing is happening in the US and it gets a different coverage. So there are double standards, something we've got to get rid of. You know, very often our law enforcement agencies are being accused of acting too harshly during some protests. And what about the European countries where, you know, tear gas is used, and water cannons and resin bullets? You know, I talked to a colleague of mine talking about Belarus. I told him about everything, what's happening there and what's happening in Belarus. And he says, yes, but we are a democratic country. If a resin bullet takes away your eye, what should you tell to the victim? Will you tell the victim that it's a resin bullet that has come from a rubber bullet that has come from a democratic gun? Well, I don't think you can explain that to a victim. So I am saying that these things are used as tools for political strife, for political purposes. You know, as the joke goes, you can seek this and seek that. You won't do that, but still you have to try to strive for this. I think you're embarking on a very difficult path, Mr. President. You have spoken in favor of those who entered the capital, and don't you think that you might be blocked in social networks due to that, due to your argumentation? But I never said that it was a good thing. I think you have not followed me attentively. And I didn't talking about giving any assessment to that, you know. I just talked about the consequences of those actions, and I don't give a damn about whether they block me in social networks or what. I'm thinking about the good of the Russian people. Chancellor, can you comment on those mass protests in Belarus? We gave the coverage to how harshly they were dispersed, and there were also mass protests in the US, and they were dispersed quite harshly too. But the European Union has condemned mass the dispersal of mass protests in Belarus, and it has also introduced very harsh sanctions with regards to the Belarusian regime, and it has spoken against the Lukashenko regime. At the same time, the EU has recognized the American president, even though it hasn't recognized the new Belarusian president who's been elected, and the EU has not condemned the protests and the dispersal in the US. Can you comment on that, please? I see there are many differences in that. I don't think you can draw a comparison between these two things. We used to have very good contacts with Belarus. We had good cooperation. But I don't think that the elections in Belarus have been just or fair, and we've been particularly indignant about this forced landing of a Ryanair plane and the detention of 2 journalists. Neither Austria nor the European Union are willing to turn a blind eye to these incidents, nor can we turn a blind eye to how the opposition in Belarus is treated. And that is why we had to react, to respond, and introduce sanctions. We're hopeful that the situation will change for the better. No one is interested in destabilization, but democratization of the country should be ensured. It's important, and changes have to happen that will take a turn for the better. We might disagree, and our opinions and views can disagree, but we are preoccupied by what is happening in Belarus. And what we can do at the EU that is something we believe we had to do. We would very much like for the situation to change. And yes, we do have our economic interests in Belarus, and that is why we are interested in the situation taking a turn for the better. We are interested in Belarus following the best path of development. We're interested in the development of Belarusian democratic society. We don't want to see journalists persecuted. We want the right to hold an alternative point of view to be recognized and protected. And yes, double standards often make it into the headlines of newspapers, but there are different examples, and we don't want some things to be accepted if they happen in one country and not be accepted when it happens elsewhere. What's happened in the capital cannot be compared to what happened in Belarus. Yes, those were dramatic events. That was a blow to the American democracy. But, you know, political motivation is very dangerous. You mentioned Roman Protasevich, who's been detained in Belarus. You called Roman Protasevich a journalist, but do you know that he used to fight as part of the Azov battalion? Not Russia, but the US Congress has demanded that the Azov battalion be recognized as a fascist organization, and the emblem of this battalion is a swastika. So this person fought in the ranks of this battalion having a swastika on his shoulders. So what do you think? Terrorist? Well, I think he's a blogger and a journalist. And if anyone is unhappy with what he thinks, still this person has to be entitled to speaking his mind. So forcing an aircraft to land and then detaining anyone and then forcing them to confess, that is not something that is normal. So if you look at the things impartially, and we are a neutral country, I'm going to tell you that traditionally we've had very good relations with Belarus. We've had numerous contacts, and we believe that there's a line not to be crossed. You've got to differentiate between things. There needs to be a distinction. And a red line was crossed in that case, and that is why the EU has had to act and respond. We believe such actions are inadmissible. And in future, it would be great if we avoided these situations from happening in the first place. These standards need to be observed everywhere. Mr. President, last weekend you spent with President Lukashenko. First, I would like to ask whether you believe in the Hamas version, that Hamas was really involved, as the Belarusian authorities are saying. You know, I don't want to give any assessment to what happened in the U.S., nor do I want to comment on what happened with that aircraft. To be quite frank, I don't know anything about that. What about the Russian special services? Have you participated in that operation? No, certainly not. Yes, there was a statement by the NATO leadership claiming that Russia has taken part in that operation, but NATO is in danger if the NATO leadership makes such claims, because it means that these people simply do not understand how things like that play out, how they happen. You know, it's all organized differently, not like you imagine it. International cooperation is simply impossible. You know, we detained those people who were planning a coup d'etat in Belarus and Moscow, but we did that at the request of the Belarusian KGB. And as President Lukashenko explained to me, they had not been planning any operations like that, but they had come into possession of information that this person was on board when it was the plane was over Belarus, when photos made the way onto the internet. So I'm not going to comment on that, because the truth is always somewhere in between what different people are saying. It's best not to interfere, not to get involved. We should give people a chance to sort this out. So whatever anyone is saying about this regime oppressing this or that, you have to understand that changes will happen, driven by objective circumstances, by the development of society itself. As far as this plane goes, let me remind you that an aircraft of one state leader was forced to land. Evo Morales, yes, he was a head of state, and the plane was forced to land. He had to leave the plane, and he was searched. And no one remembers that right now. And, you know, it didn't happen once. There were other instances like that. But in this particular case, it all has taken such forms that it has garnered so much attention. Understandable. What's happening in Belarus is attracting a lot of attention, and many neighbors of ours are trying to exert some influence. It doesn't mean that you have to turn a blind eye. You just have to stand aside. You don't have to interfere. I spoke to Evo Morales about that, and I think it was a national humiliation, but they were trying to keep mum about that because they couldn't do anything about that. But getting back to this aircraft, Roman Protasevich was a wanted person in Belarus, and that is why he was detained. You know, the audience here is very big. The St. Petersburg International Forum has economic in its name, and you are harassing us with these questions about politics and myself and the Chancellor, some Roman Protasevich. I don't know him, and I don't want to know anything about him. Let him do what he wants. That's not what I'm asking about. I mean, in Russia, there are wanted people. So if there were an aircraft from London to Thailand, and if a person wanted in Russia were on board and the aircraft was flying over Russia, would you force that plane to land to detain that person? Well, I'm not going to tell you. Well, in that case, let's get back to the economy. About Russia and Belarus, how deep is the integration, economic and otherwise, between these two countries? You know, we've got quite a big trade, almost to the tune of 30 billion US dollars. Belarus has a population of 10 million, so the figure is quite big, given that. And I think this is quite telling. Our cooperation is very broad in scale, industrial cooperation in the first place, and I think this is important. This is something we're going to develop henceforth, and we're going to follow the international model of searching for such types of cooperation that are going to be mutually beneficial, that are going to serve the interest of both countries. And we have the grounds to believe that we will be able to ensure that in agriculture, in energy, in industry, yes, just as everywhere in the world, we have some differences. Those who buy want to buy at a lower price. Those who sell want to sell at a higher one. But we will find the best solutions, both as part of the Union State and as part of the Eurasian Economic Union. We've got some plans we're contemplating for the coming years, in energy in particular, and we will stick to the plan. Yes, we do have arguments. Yes, we do have disagreements, but on the whole, we're working in a positive manner, and the results are there to see. Another important economic issue, the Russian taxation system. On many occasions, you've mentioned that the stability of the taxation system is one of the signals to the business. And taxation is important for business to be able to plan for the longer term. At the same time, we know that in 2020, VAT was raised, and this year the income tax is going to rise. And also the government is going to look at the dividends, and there's going to be sort of a greed tax if the dividends are too big. And starting this year, we've come to know that probably additional 100 billion rubles is going to be levied as a tax on metal producers, because, as I'm quoting someone, the government was sort of tricked out of 100 billion rubles by the metal producers. So what do you say to that? First, I would like to say that our tax system is quite stable, but of course our government has to respond to what's happening across the world. In the world economy, it is to fine-tune the system, do it in a targeted manner without tearing apart the fabric of economic relations across our country. Yes, some things have been raised, but on the other hand, I've announced that some things will be revised downwards and that the social contributions will be halved. So some fees, some taxes are going down, others go up a little, but on the whole, we are striking a balance, and we want to make sure that the fiscal burden is stable and acceptable. The government is succeeding in that.
As for the metallurgic industry, well, I'd like to address my colleagues. I know all of them personally by name. Please don't get upset by what Deputy Prime Minister Belousov said. Don't get offended. He said that in a passion of the discussion that he was in. Probably it was a bit of a tough statement on his side. But the thing is that the market situation has changed, and the industry and the metallurgic sector has started accumulating extra profits. That is obvious. And it is only logical that equal super profits are wanted not just from the exports, but also from the domestic market. Well, we can understand the position of those businessmen. Why lose money if you can make more? But on the other hand, it results in certain disbalances in the economy. Why? Well, there are, let's say, buyers of the automobile transport. Those are Russian companies. They sign up contracts, they are ready to pay money, and all of a sudden the manufacturer is telling them, you have to pay 68% more. And they ask, how come? Well, it's just that the metallurgic industry is charging more now. And we have it all along the value chain. The same applies to the defense industry, to construction, and so on and so forth. So that actually applies not just to the metallurgic industry, it applies to many industries. It applies to the energy sector, to the oil sector. Once the world prices are going up, they try to raise the prices of the domestic market. Agriculture, wheat export, prices go up, and they also want to do the same domestically. I've already mentioned that one of the problems that we're facing today is inflation, and that is also related to that type of action. There is a whole number of well-known tools that enable us to mitigate that type of problems. Those are the customs tariffs policy and the corresponding measures. We do apply them regarding the oil sector, but there we have developed a certain algorithm of actions. And in order to make sure that the oil industry is not suffering, if the prices are going down, the relationship between the oil sector and the government and the state are changing accordingly, and the same happens if they go up. And we could do something similar in this regard. Maybe we could shift towards long-term contracts regarding the defense industry, for example, or in the area of construction, because the manufacturers and the representatives of the metallurgic industry care about that type of anchor contracts. They know if they guarantee that type of volume in sales, that is very meaningful to the stability of those companies if they enter into that type of contracts, not just on the fixed rates, but by elaborating a certain mechanisms and the rules for the pricing that could resolve the situation, that could do it. It's just that it has to be done in a timely manner, and that type of algorithm will be found. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to gradually wrap up our very exciting conversation. At the very end, allow me to ask one last question. So we live in a fascinating world where it looks like that all usual laws and rules are falling apart. It's great for us journalists. We have plenty of things to discuss. And even such world organizations like World Trade Organizations are changing their rules, and even the UN is finding it hard to face today's reality. So my last question to all of you, gentlemen, would be, what is your outlook on the world after the pandemic? What would be the new configuration of the world? What will change? Mr. Chancellor, let us start with you.
Also ich glaube, eine Lehre aus der Pandemie kann sein, dass wir als Menschheit immer wieder...
There is one key lesson I've learned from the pandemic. We people always face challenges. And it would be good if together we would try to learn to address those challenges without creating any additional problems that we sometimes tend to create. And that would be my proposal to my colleagues. It would be good if we could all be very much focused on keeping this world peaceful. We all have been saying that the world after the pandemic would be different. Everything would be different. This world will never be the same again. People have been scared that we will never get back to the global world traveling, that there will be no new international forums. But actually, the opposite is happening. It looks like that thanks to the vaccination, we see the infection rate going down, and the world seems to be getting back to normal. And people are hungry for personal communication, for contacts, and it looks like that the world after the pandemic will be more or less the same as it was before. We'll just get back to normal life. It's just important to make sure that we do that quickly, that we achieve the economic success, and I believe the pandemic could be a good lesson to all of us. We should all remember how important is the well-being of humans. Our health is key, and it is important to be very cautious and to pay attention to this fragile balance in the whole world. And the pandemic has demonstrated and has taught us that we need to take care of the economic recovery, and we need to pay attention to such things as digitalization and healthcare. We need to work very actively on that. What would you like to add, Your Highness? What is your outlook on the post-pandemic world?
طبعا نحن ما زلنا في هذه الجائحة وطبعا دول كثيرة تأثرت.
Well, certainly, so far, we are still going through this pandemic. It's not over yet. And the leading economies in the world have suffered. However, in many countries, we recognize signs of economic recovery. And I'm proud to say that the state of Qatar managed to overcome many problems and issues connected with the damaging impact of the pandemic. And now, we certainly have accumulated extensive experience, and we're ready to state that now we know how to overcome that type of difficulties. But of course, international cooperation is extremely important, especially whenever we talk about production and distribution of the vaccines. And we certainly would like the pandemic to be over very soon. But in order to do that, we need to ensure equal access to the vaccine for people all around the globe. And that requires the corresponding action from the side of the legislators, regulators, and all other experts in the scientific community. The world can change. However, I would share the view of my dear friend, the Federal Chancellor of Austria. First and foremost, we will be able to state that we've accumulated extensive experience and we will be better at addressing those issues in the future. Thank you. Mr. President, how will the world change? Well, first of all, the pandemic has demonstrated it to all of us how vulnerable we are. That's the first thing. The second thing, well, we have realized the importance of science and technologies. And now we know how important it is to unite our efforts to combat global crises. Now we know that only through unification of our efforts can we achieve the desired results. The pandemic has certainly pushed the industries that are technology intensive. And this is exactly something that will define the scientific progress in the future, and that primarily applies to the AI, technologies connected with that, and so on and so forth. But the key thing to me is that now we are truly aware of the actual and highest value that we have, that is the health, well-being of us, and the true human life communication. This is something that we've lacked very badly, and we still lack it very badly in the time of pandemic. We really got to feel that our health, our well-being, and the actual human communication is the top and absolute value, and this is something that we should be guided by when we structure our life in the future. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention. Well, who would have guessed that the current St. Petersburg International Economic Forum gives us a feeling of the first day getting back to school after summer holidays, when you haven't seen your friends for so long time, and now you finally meet and hug one another. Let us hope we will never ever have to live apart again. Together we can do so much more. I'd like to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I'd like to thank His Highness Emir of Qatar and the Federal Chancellor of Austria. Thank you so much for agreeing to participate in our discussions, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much.